Hebrews 11, often referred to as the Hall of Faith. So cool as we learn in this chapter the many different examples that are highlighted by the writer of this book to share with us the acts of faith and the way that they lived by faith. And I'm just going to dive right into it and share with you what it looks like to live by faith. Verse 1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. This is what our fathers and mothers before us, the prophets, were commended before us. It talks about in Hebrews 1 how God in past times spoke to us by the fathers and the prophets. He's talking about the Old Testament. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. It's what they were commended for. God commended those in the Old Testament that believed him even though they hadn't yet received what was promised to them. Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. He had faith and he trusted God that even though he didn't see it yet, he trusted in what God had spoken to him. And it goes on by saying, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. I want to show you something cool. A lot of people, they go through this list and they realize that this list is done primarily in chronological order. It starts with Abel, then goes to Enoch and goes down the list. But what we don't realize is that you're actually in this list too. You say, wait a second, I'm in the Bible? Yeah, you're actually in verse 3 because it says, by faith, we understand the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, we believe that God spoke and the universe was, that what God said is, and we trust in God. And because of that, by faith, we believe in Jesus Christ. And then he begins to list the different characters of the Old Testament, the pictures that pushed us and showed us Christ. And he says in verse 4, by faith, Abel brought God a better offer than Cain did. Or it says a sacrifice or an offering that was more excellent. Cain did things out of the flesh. He brought things his way, but Abel brought his first and his best. He brought the firstborn of his flock and the fat thereof, and it was a blood sacrifice for his sins. Abel brought to God what God asked for. Cain brought to God what he thought was a better substitute. Cain is a picture of the world that says, no, God, I know what's best. Abel is a picture that says, no, God, you know what's best. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, his offering still speaks, or Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. I love that statement. Even though he's passed away, his faith still speaks to this day through the word. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Many people believe Enoch is a picture of the church and how God is coming back to rapture the church and to take us away before there's times of tribulation. There's many different debates about this. We're not getting into it today, but Enoch is seen as a picture of the church. Verse 6, and I love this scripture. You'll hear me reference it all the time. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. For anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. You must believe that he is, and he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. We have to believe that he is, and he is who he says he is. We need to seek God to please God. He says in Jeremiah, seek me and you will find me when you seek me with your whole heart. Verse 7, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is keeping with faith. Noah had faith, and even though he hadn't seen the flood yet, God warned him, and he built an ark not just for himself, but to save his family. And by trusting God, his life condemned the world. He didn't condemn people. His life condemned the world's way. He said, I'm going to do things God's way rather than the world's way. And he kept the faith. By faith, Abraham, verse 8. When called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he left his father's house and he went out on a journey. The scripture says that he was a pilgrim in the earth. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the scripture would say. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He wasn't worried about what the world could give him. He was worried about what God had promised him. And by faith, even Sarah, Abraham, his wife. who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. He who promised is faithful, Hebrews 10 told us. And Sarah saw God as faithful. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands of the seashore. Abraham and Sarah, from them came a great multitude throughout the earth, and all the nations were blessed. It says, by his seed, speaking to Christ, all nations would be blessed. Speaking of the Jews and the Gentiles, it was prophetic in nature. It was powerful. All these people were still living by faith when they died. Watch this. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country. They were longing for a heavenly place to go. They weren't looking toward what was in front of them. They were looking toward what was before them. They were looking forward to heaven. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And God has prepared a city for us. Jesus is in heaven. He said, I go to prepare a place for you. For my Father's house are many mansions. Jesus is preparing a place for you and for me, and he will return for us soon. By faith, Abraham, verse 17, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. It's a picture of God's love for us. Jesus was his one and only, John 3:16 tells us. Even though God said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reconciled, if you will. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Abraham trusted God, and he said he didn't know how God was going to do it, but he trusted him anyways. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Isaac spoke over the next generation, and by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, I love this one, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. God, why did you have to say that? And worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Doesn't even seem necessary, but the staff was a picture of how they would mark throughout their life things that God had done. And it says that he leaned on it. He leaned on the Lord as he blessed them, but it calls his blessing an act of worship. It says, and he worshiped as he leaned. When we speak love, when we speak life over our kids, it's by faith, meaning it's an act of worship. Everything we do by faith is worship to the Lord. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites, spoke prophetically about the exodus from Egypt, and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. He said, don't leave me here. He said, take my body and take it to the promised land. Verse 23. Let's take a breath. So much power in this chapter. It's one of the most powerful chapters in the entire Bible, one of the most powerful books of the Bible. It's one of my personal favorites. You know I get excited when I talk about Hebrews. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. They hid him because they saw that he was a gift from God, and they would not abort him as the king had directed because they knew that that was not the will of God. Verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He said, no, I'm not going to do things the world's way. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. He said, no. He said, I'm not going to be seen as one of Pharaoh's children. I'm not going to be seen as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He said, I'm not going down that path. He said, I want to do things God's way. I want to be a part of God's people. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. Don't get so caught up with what's in front of you or what's behind you that you miss what God has before you. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He had caught a glimpse of God, and he said, I want to follow after that. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. It's talking about the Exodus, how Moses led the people of Israel out of bondage into freedom. We are going through the entire Old Testament in one chapter. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Verse 30, another deep breath. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. God had told his people to walk around Jericho for 7 days, on the seventh day to shout. And he said, I will go before you and fight your battles, and the walls would fall down. But before he did, he sent 2 spies into the city to go rescue Rahab. They did not have to go into the city. There was no reason for them to go into the city except that God had seen something about her that was different, and he wanted to rescue Rahab. Verse 31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. I want to share on this quickly, but it's important. Rahab, the Bible goes out of its way to refer to her profession. It does it in the book of Hebrews, it does it in the book of James, and it can seem like it's shaming her. And I want to share with you that the Bible is not shaming her. God is going out of his way to show you the depths that he was willing to go to save her. Rahab is not only was she a prostitute, but she was also a Gentile. You may not realize this, but in the list of Hebrews 11, she was the only Gentile, if you will, that came after Abraham. She was the only one that was not born into covenant. She was adopted and grafted into covenant. And what she is she's a picture of us. It shows us the lengths that Christ was willing to go for us, that he would send the 2 spies in to go rescue her, even though they didn't need to. He wanted to. The lengths that Christ went to rescue us, you who were caught up in your sin. I believe it's Ephesians 2. You who were dead in your trespasses and caught up in your sin. Me, who was dead in sin, he has made us alive. Whom hath he quickened, the scripture says. It's a beautiful picture, the life of Rahab, how she was not killed because she welcomed the spies. She was not killed with those who were disobedient. She welcomed the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? Verse 32, I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms. I'm glad he didn't have time, or we would be talking for about 45 minutes. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouth of lions. This is talking of Daniel. Quenched the fury of the flames. I believe he's talking about the 3 Hebrew boys. And escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength. And who became powerful. I would say that who escaped the edge of the sword was probably referring to Esther. Whose weakness was turned to strength. And who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. I believe that's probably speaking of the time where Elijah spoke and prayed over a child. There were others who were tortured, refused to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Verse 36, and this is powerful. I want you to catch this. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And this is what I want to be said of your life and to be said of mine. The world was not worthy of them. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. They were all commended for their faith. Now watch this. They were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. Since God had planned something better for us, that only together with us would be made perfect. God has something better for you, and God has something better for me. I haven't received it yet. Even though I've received Christ, I have the promise of heaven. I haven't received it yet, neither of you. But one day we will. It is going to be great. Be blessed today.